Ready, steady, go. Hey, everybody. So today I'm explaining to my friend here and you guys Ken Wilber's altitudes of consciousness. Now, the reason that we were talking about that actually is because we were talking about religion and the benefits it has on society, but also a lot of its shortcomings and why a lot of people either leave religion or stay in religion. And then I was just like, hey, well, do you know like the different altitudes of consciousness, right? And so Ken Wilber, really, really cool guy. He's like this, I don't know, he's like this metaphysician where he talks a lot about just the nature of humanity and the way we think and the way we put things together. It's pretty cool. And so he built these altitudes of consciousness, sort of like levels of evolution of how the human mind develops and how we can be better. So this is, well, be better, but just kind of where we're at, right? It also maps. It maps with the Universal Codex. I would call it a 6-degree framework. So there's 12 steps, right? So at the very top, I don't even know all the name of the stages if I'm being honest, right? I just know the numbers, right? So I'll do them by the numbers. But level 1 is basically you're like an amoeba, right? You just like eat, feed, like have sex, reproduce, like you're just super basic, right? Level 2 is a little bit more than that. He calls it like a shamanistic mind where like you worship like greater things and totems. So it's like you believe in magic and you worship like idols and things like that. So like freaking like Egypt and not Egyptians like old, but like the Israelites in Egypt when they were worshiping idols. Like you pray to a statue or you pray to the sun because like it's your god, right? And then over here we have 3rd-degree mind, which is where you're kind of moving away from deity, but you get a defined sense of the ego, and where you're very, very selfish, right? So you're very selfish. It's like it's kill or be killed, winner takes all, natural selection. I'm gonna dominate. Like I'm gonna take care of myself. Everything else dies, you know. So it's a very selfish, egocentric way of living, right? And then at here, level 4, I remember this color. The color is amber. And this is what he would call like the religion. And this is where religion is firmly here. So religion is basically like moralistic. I'm right, you're wrong, right? They're good, they're bad, us versus them. Religion firmly sits in here, right? And typically I've come to find that like it's very difficult to be in religion as you ascend up the ladder because religion, the nature of religion is that these entities, they have to pull energy from other like entities. And so consciousness. And you might say like, what do you mean entities? Well, as you guys know, there's thought, like whether you know this or not, there's thought forms that grow. And when those thought forms grow and gather enough momentum in the collective unconsciousness, they basically become an egregore or an entity, like a thought entity, and it becomes like a creature. And this creature then, in order to survive, will create systems to capture energy. So people in religion and most religions exist as these entities, these egregores that exist on 4th level of consciousness, and they're basically feeding on consciousness that's equal or lesser than it, right? So typically, if you start advancing beyond level 4, you're basically too big for the entity to eat you and it can't exist. And so as a result, it either tries to chop you down to size and chop you up so it can eat you, or it will reject you and punish you for leaving it. So this is where you get into level 5, which is instead of the religious mind, we call it the rationalist mind. So this is someone who's hyper rational, thinks everything out, who's like, oh, there's more than one side to things. There's a rational way to see this. The rationalist believes that, okay, there's no right and wrong. They start moving into a large degree of moral relativity because they start recognizing that it's not a simple matter of right and wrong. It's not black and white, but there's a kind of gray area. And they start thinking about things in a matter of consequences versus morality. Now, you get a little bit of a switchback once you get to 6. Level 6 is what I would call I can't remember. I remember their color is green, but they're someone who you call like the activist, right? So this is where they see that everything is kind of moral and relativistic, but that they still do believe that there's good because they start understanding the mechanics of connection. And so the activist is actually here. This is like people who are like Greenpeace, hippies, love, like, but they're also like, man, we're hurting the earth, man. Make peace, not Lord, not love, like war, dude. Oh my God. And the issue with this activism is that it's marked by a deep sense of narcissism. So usually the very like most advanced sense, this is going to sound really fucked up, but I think a lot of the what you see in the LGBTQIA movement, LGBTQ, right? I'm not saying I know for certain, but I think a lot of what you see in the LGBTQIA is what represents this art. And it is definitely classified by this, the sense of narcissism, right? Because it goes back to this, there is a sense of morality and we are start recognizing we exist and have a connection to other things that are beyond the physical self. But because there's not a sense of groundedness yet in the reality of that, you start becoming quite narcissistic. And that's kind of the failing of this thinking. But that's when you start getting into level 7 mind. Level 7 and level 8 are very interesting, right? Because this is where you start getting into. So level 7 is where now you start recognizing there is what you call non-absolutism. So it's not that you're relativistic anymore, but it's that you realize, oh, I can take on other people's beliefs and put them on and off, take them on and off like clothing. You start realizing you are not your beliefs. You start having this, because, and the reason we say this here is because one thing about LGBTQ people, so whatever you want about them, or if you are them, great. They recognize sexuality as flexible, right? But, and even gender, which, you know, we could talk about that. But one of the best things that they understand is there's this flexibility of rationale, personality expression. And when you start moving into the higher expressions of consciousness, you start realizing your personality or your way of living or whatever, there's no fixed morality like you have here at like the religious or rationalist level. The rationalist understands, but the rationalist still thinks in terms of consequences, right? But here the non-absolutist recognizes that it's all just a connected system. They understand that this is just a system that is all working together and I can choose wherever I stand in the system, and that it's ultimately flexible as a human being. And that the system is developed by human beings for survival. And that survival is the fundamental key instinct, right? And so there's no sense of absolute moralism, but they don't move down this dark side because they recognize that obviously killing and hurting people isn't going to work out. And this is where you start, or maybe they do, but then eventually they evolve into this non-absolutism. This is where we're going to start calling into, we'll call this the social mind, right? He's got terms for these things, but I don't know the terms. I only know the colors and the stages. So this is where he starts calling it the social mind. This is where he starts recognizing that now not only is there a connection between the systems of humanity towards our own survival, but we also have systems that are connected to the environment. Kind of like what the activist recognized here, but what the absolutist, but where the activist didn't realize is that humanity is part of a greater system, and that we ourselves are not dominating the system. What the activist fails to recognize, that the person at the social mind recognizes, is they recognize that humanity is not absent of this system, all right? So that this system is greater than we are. And just like the non-absolutist realizes they can take their beliefs and their morality and move it around, the person in the social mind recognizes, not only can I do that, but this is also how the environment works. This is how the universe works. This is how animals work. So now you start getting someone who's thinking not just out of humanity, but they're thinking in a much larger cosmic setting. And that sets you up to go into what this is called social mind, right? Or the parapsychic mind. Parapsychic is now where you realize, okay, I have an energetic connection with everything around me. And not only is this energetic connection real, based off of where I sit in relation to my energy I can then create or build results in relation. The parapsychic doesn't quite know how to manipulate or work with this energy yet, but they're now becoming aware of it. They're now aware that, hey, this energy changes based around me, and that I can take it on and off when I move within this system. And the reason it's called psychic is because they start recognizing that the construct of reality functions more like a projection versus an actual reality, right? It's not as fixed as they like to think. This is where you start getting into 10, 11 of the higher altitudes. Now, once again, I don't know the words for this, right? But once you start getting into like out of parapsychic mind, we'll call it where you get into pure psychic mind. And this is basically like where witches and wizards and like kind of like people who are pretty out there, pretty not ungrounded, but basically where they're living in realities where energetic beings and people basically they see the world as energy. They don't really see it in terms of like social systems, structures, identity, all the stuff normal people kind of use that we talk about, like gender, identity, politics. This person is way beyond that. They just see energy and they just see movement and waves and energy thought forms that are moving through reality. And once you get up to these last two levels, this is what you would call clear mind, which is basically nirvana. So clear mind is basically like you're one with God, you're one with the universe, and you've meditated on the mountain and all is one and one is all, and you very much have identified and embodied the oneness of everything, right? And so the amount of people who have reached this are probably just a handful of people through the centuries of world. And then right in between that, you would get from someone who sees the entire world as energy, but they're still moving and capitalizing on it, to the person who has oneness. You would get this in between stage at stage 11, where basically this person is able to now like navigate, and they're what I would call like beyond the story. So they can navigate beyond the story. And navigating beyond the story just basically means that you don't see everything as you don't see your past, you don't see your humanity, your race, your gender, any of these things as anything more than elements of a story. And now, because you're able to understand energy and how it influences it, you're able to navigate and create and build experiences based on what you understand of the mechanics of the universe. And you're actually actively able to navigate that. And you're navigating it and you're moving through it and you're understanding how to work with that energy in a plausible way. And yeah, that's what happens once you get to this level of consciousness, right? And so this is really cool. Check it out. Ken Wilber's Altitudes of Consciousness. There's all types of different ways to see it or whatever. But that's just a quick overview. We can talk more about it later, but I just kind of wanted to go over that quickly for my friend and for you guys. So hopefully this makes sense, and it's pretty good. Leave any comments and likes down in the description below, and stay happy, stay healthy. Peace.